Will Smith's hands were shaking so violently that he had to grip the armrests of his chair to keep them still, his knuckles turning white as Jonathan Roumie leaned forward and spoke 7 words that would shatter 3 decades of carefully constructed Hollywood armor. "Will, when did you stop being real?" The question hung in the air like thunder before lightning, and what happened in the next 43 seconds would become the most watched moment in television history, a confession so raw and unexpected that it would leave millions of viewers around the world unable to look away. The transformation on Will's face was immediate and devastating, his trademark million-dollar smile collapsing into something between anguish and relief as tears began forming in his eyes before he could stop them. The studio audience fell into a shocked silence so complete that the hum of the overhead lights became audible, and even Will's personal security team, who had stood stoically through thousands of interviews, took an involuntary step forward, uncertain whether their client was having a medical emergency or a spiritual one. Jonathan's brown eyes remained locked on Will's with an intensity that made the seasoned actor unable to look away, unable to deflect with humor, unable to perform his way out of this moment like he'd done countless times before. His cross necklace caught the studio lights as he shifted closer, and there was something in his expression that went beyond mere compassion. It was the look of someone who could see straight through the masks people wore and loved them anyway. Will's voice cracked on that single syllable, and he had to pause to swallow hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly as 30 years of untold truths fought their way to the surface. What he said next wasn't caught clearly by the microphones, his voice dropping to barely a whisper, but the cameraman who zoomed in close enough to read his lips would later tell reporters that those 3 words, "I'm so tired," changed his own life forever. The confession that followed would reveal a hidden pain that millions of successful people carry in silence, and the spiritual truth Jonathan shared in response would offer them something they'd been desperately searching for without even knowing it. The interview had begun exactly 28 minutes earlier with all the energy and excitement typical of a major network talk show, the kind of polished entertainment that viewers tune into for escape rather than confrontation. James Corden had bounded onto the stage with his characteristic enthusiasm, introducing his guests to thunderous applause and whistles from the packed studio audience. "Tonight we have 2 absolute legends," he'd announced with genuine excitement in his voice. Will Smith, one of the biggest movie stars on the planet, and Jonathan Roumie, the man who's bringing Jesus Christ to life in the groundbreaking series The Chosen. The crowd had erupted with appreciation, and Will had entered from stage left with that signature swagger that had made him beloved across 4 decades of entertainment, high-fiving audience members and flashing that smile that had launched 1,000 magazine covers. Will Smith had arrived at the CBS studios that Tuesday afternoon feeling completely in control, which was exactly how he preferred to approach every public appearance. After all, he'd mastered the art of the interview over 35 years in the spotlight, navigating everything from softball promotional conversations to hard-hitting questions about his personal life with the skill of a trained diplomat. He'd prepared talking points about his new film, rehearsed a few funny anecdotes, and mentally mapped out exactly how he'd steer any uncomfortable topics back to safe territory. But from the moment Jonathan Roumie had walked into the green room and shaken his hand, Will had felt something shift in the atmosphere, something he couldn't quite name but that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up in a way that had nothing to do with nervousness and everything to do with recognition. There was a quality to Jonathan's presence that Will hadn't encountered before in all his years of meeting actors, directors, and celebrities of every stripe. The younger actor wasn't starstruck or overly reverent, wasn't trying to impress or network or angle for anything. Instead, he'd looked at Will with eyes that seemed to see past the performer and straight into the person, and when he'd said, "It's an honor to meet you, Will," there was a weight to those words that suggested he meant something deeper than the usual Hollywood pleasantries. Jonathan had mentioned spending the morning in prayer, and something about the casual way he'd said it, as natural as mentioning he'd had coffee, had made Will feel suddenly exposed in a way he couldn't explain. The first 15 minutes of the interview had flowed smoothly enough, covering the expected territory of upcoming projects and behind-the-scenes stories. Will had the audience laughing with his impression of his co-star, and Jonathan had spoken movingly about the responsibility of portraying Jesus with authenticity and reverence. "Every morning before we film, I spend at least 2 hours in prayer and scripture reading," Jonathan had explained, his voice carrying a quiet authority that made even James lean forward with interest. "I'm not just playing a character, I'm trying to reflect the heart of God to people who are searching." Will had nodded along, impressed by the dedication, and had even shared that he'd watched several episodes of The Chosen with Jada and the kids. "Man, you really captured something special," Will had said, and he'd meant it genuinely. "There's a piece in your portrayal that feels real, you know?" That's when Jonathan had turned to face Will more directly, and James had sensed the shift in energy enough to set down his note cards. "Will, can I ask you something personal?" Jonathan's voice was gentle, but there was steel underneath it, the tone of someone who wasn't going to accept a deflection. The studio audience quieted instinctively, and Will's media-trained reflexes kicked in with a casual, "Sure, man, go ahead," even as something deeper inside him tensed with the knowledge that whatever was coming next wouldn't be easy to laugh away. James Corden glanced between his two guests with the practiced awareness of someone who'd hosted thousands of conversations, sensing that the carefully planned promotional interview was about to veer into territory his producers hadn't anticipated. As one of late-night television's most experienced hosts, he'd navigated countless unexpected moments, but the energy crackling between Jonathan and Will felt different, heavier somehow, like the air before a thunderstorm. The camera operators instinctively adjusted their angles, zooming in tighter as their professional instincts recognized that something significant was unfolding before their lenses. "Will, when did you stop being real?" Jonathan's question landed like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples spreading outward through the studio in waves of uncomfortable silence. It wasn't accusatory or judgmental, but there was an uncompromising directness to it that cut through every defense Will had carefully constructed over decades in the public eye. The audience shifted in their seats, uncertain whether they were witnessing an ambush or an intervention, while Will's confident posture visibly faltered as his shoulders slumped forward slightly and his hands gripped the chair arms tighter. "What do you mean by that?" Will managed to respond, attempting his trademark deflective humor with a small laugh that came out sounding hollow and forced. "I'm always real, man. What you see is what you get." But even as the words left his mouth, his eyes betrayed him, filling with moisture he couldn't quite blink away fast enough. Jonathan leaned forward slightly, his expression radiating a compassion so genuine it was almost painful to witness, and shook his head slowly. "No, what we see is an incredible performance," Jonathan said quietly, and there was no malice in his voice, only a devastating kindness. "You've spent your entire life making sure everyone loves you, making sure you're the most positive person in every room, making sure nobody ever sees you struggle or doubt or break. But that's not being real, that's being perfect, and perfection is just another word for pretending." The words hung in the air like an indictment and an invitation all at once, and Will's breathing had become noticeably shallow, his chest rising and falling in quick succession as decades of carefully managed public image cracked under the weight of simple truth. James had abandoned any pretense of controlling the interview, recognizing with the wisdom of experience that sometimes the best thing a host can do is step back and let the moment unfold. The production crew had gone completely still behind their cameras and equipment, and even the usually restless audience members sat frozen, afraid that any movement might shatter whatever sacred space had spontaneously formed on the stage. One of the cameramen would later describe feeling tears running down his own face as he filmed, though he couldn't have explained exactly why in that moment. "Jonathan, I don't think..." Will started to speak, but his voice caught and failed him, forcing him to stop mid-sentence and swallow hard against the emotion threatening to overwhelm his carefully maintained composure. His eyes darted toward the audience, toward the cameras, toward the exit, searching desperately for an escape route that would let him retreat behind his persona and restore the comfortable distance between his public self and his private pain. But Jonathan's steady gaze held him in place like an anchor, refusing to let him run from the confrontation that his soul had been avoiding for years. "You don't think what?" Jonathan prompted gently, and there was something in his tone that reminded Will of every mentor, every father figure, every person who'd ever truly cared about him rather than just wanting something from him. "You don't think you can be honest? You don't think people will accept the real you? Or you don't think you even remember who that person is anymore?" Each question landed like a gentle blow, dismantling Will's defenses one layer at a time, and the tears that had been threatening finally spilled over, tracking down his cheeks as his face contorted with the effort of holding back everything he'd suppressed for so long. "I'm tired," Will whispered, and though the microphones barely caught it, those two words carried the weight of a confession that had been building for decades. "I'm so tired of being Will Smith." The admission hung in the air like a declaration of surrender, and if this testimony is stirring something deep in your own heart right now, comment the words, "I'm tired too" below, because what happens next will show you there's hope for the exhausted, grace for the pretenders, and freedom for those brave enough to stop performing and start being real. The studio had transformed from an entertainment venue into something resembling a confessional, and Jonathan reached across the space between them to place his hand on Will's shoulder with the kind of touch that communicates safety without words. "Tell me about the weight you're carrying," he said softly, and it wasn't a question so much as an invitation, an open door that Will could choose to walk through or turn away from. For several long seconds, Will sat with his face in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs that no amount of Oscar-winning acting skill could manufacture or control, and when he finally looked up, the mask had completely fallen away to reveal a man who was drowning in plain sight. "You want to know the truth?" Will's voice came out raw and broken, stripped of all the polish and charisma that had made him one of the most bankable stars in Hollywood history. "After the Oscars, after everything that happened with Chris, I wanted to disappear. Not just from the industry, from existence. I spent 3 months barely able to get out of bed because the guilt was eating me alive." He paused to wipe his eyes with the back of his hand, no longer caring about the cameras capturing every moment of his unraveling. "Everyone kept telling me they forgave me, that I could move past it, that time would heal it. But here's what nobody understood: I didn't need other people to forgive me. I needed to forgive myself, and I had no idea how to do that." James Corden had tears streaming down his own face now, his professional composure completely abandoned as he witnessed something far more profound than anything his show had ever aired. The audience sat in absolute silence, many with hands pressed to their mouths or clutching tissues that the production assistants had quietly begun distributing. This wasn't entertainment anymore, it was witnessing someone's humanity laid bare in a culture that demands perfection and punishes vulnerability. Jonathan nodded slowly, his expression radiating understanding rather than pity. "Will, can I tell you something about my own journey?" He didn't wait for permission, sensing that Will needed to hear that he wasn't alone in his struggle. "Before I was cast as Jesus in The Chosen, I was a struggling actor living in a tiny apartment in Chicago, taking whatever roles I could find just to pay rent. I went through a period where I questioned everything: my career, my worth, my purpose. I felt like I was pretending to be successful while secretly failing at everything that mattered." He paused to let the parallel sink in, his voice taking on the gentle authority of someone who'd walked through fire and emerged on the other side. "And then something happened that changed everything. I stopped trying to perform my way into God's approval and I started being honest with Him about my brokenness." Will's head snapped up at those words, his red-rimmed eyes locking onto Jonathan's face with an intensity that suggested he'd just heard something his soul had been waiting years to receive. "Wait, you're telling me God doesn't want the performance?" His voice cracked on the word performance, and there was a desperate hunger in his question that made it clear this wasn't academic curiosity but existential need. "Because that's all I know how to give. I've been performing since I was 12 years old, rapping, acting, being Fresh Prince, being the action hero, being the inspiration, being the comeback story. I don't even know who I am when I'm not performing for somebody." "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Jonathan replied with quiet conviction, and his next words would become the most quoted moment from the entire interview. "Jesus doesn't want your highlight reel, Will. He wants your behind-the-scenes footage. He wants the takes that didn't make the cut, the moments you're ashamed of, the parts of yourself you've spent your whole life trying to hide from everyone including Him. Because here's the truth that religion doesn't tell you but relationship with Christ reveals: God's love isn't something you earn through performance. It's something you receive through surrender." The theological precision of Jonathan's statement landed on Will like water on a man dying of thirst, and something shifted in his expression from desperation to something approaching hope. "Jonathan, I've been in churches, Will said, his voice steadier now though still thick with emotion. I've heard sermons, I've said prayers, I've even read the Bible. But nobody ever told me I could just be broken in front of God. Everyone made it sound like I had to get my life together first, become better, stop messing up, and then maybe he'd accept me. That's religion, not relationship, Jonathan said firmly, and there was an edge to his voice now, a righteous frustration at the way truth had been distorted into performance metrics. Religion says clean yourself up and then come to God. Jesus says come as you are and I'll clean you up. Religion says perform until you're worthy. Jesus says you'll never be worthy on your own, so I became worthy for you. He leaned forward with increasing intensity, his words flowing with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent years studying scripture and even more years living it out. The night before we filmed the crucifixion scene in The Chosen, I was terrified. Not just nervous, genuinely terrified of the spiritual weight of what we were about to portray. And in my prayer time that night, I felt God say something that wrecked me. He said, "Jonathan, you think I need your perfect performance tomorrow, but what I really need is your complete surrender tonight." Will was leaning so far forward now that he'd almost slipped off his chair, his entire body language communicating a hunger for what Jonathan was describing that went beyond intellectual interest into spiritual desperation. The cameras continued rolling, but everyone involved in the production had forgotten they were making television. They were witnessing something that transcended entertainment and entered the realm of the sacred. Will's hands had stopped shaking and were now pressed flat against his chest as if trying to hold together a heart that was breaking open, and when he spoke next, his voice carried a vulnerability so raw it made the air itself feel fragile. "Jonathan, what you're describing, this surrender thing, how do I do that? Because I've tried everything else and I'm still empty. I've got money, fame, family, success, and I wake up every morning feeling like I'm suffocating under the weight of being someone I'm not." The desperation in his eyes wasn't the manufactured emotion of an actor inhabiting a character. It was the authentic cry of a soul that had reached the end of its own resources and was finally willing to ask for help. Jonathan's face transformed with a joy so profound it seemed to radiate from somewhere beyond himself, and he squeezed Will's shoulder with gentle firmness. "Will, you just did the hardest part. You admitted you can't fix yourself. That's the doorway to grace right there." He paused and looked directly into the camera for a moment before returning his gaze to Will. "Jesus doesn't need you to have all the answers or be all put together. He just needs you to stop running and turn toward him. It's not complicated, but it requires something Hollywood doesn't teach: complete honesty about who you really are." "Right here?" Will asked, his voice barely above a whisper, and there was something almost childlike in the question, a vulnerability that stripped away every layer of celebrity and revealed just a man who was tired of pretending. "Right now? In front of all these people?" His eyes swept across the studio audience, across the cameras, across James, who was now openly weeping, and something in his expression suggested he was calculating the cost of such public vulnerability against the weight of continuing to carry his secrets alone. "Right here, right now," Jonathan confirmed with absolute certainty, and there was an authority in his voice that came from something deeper than confidence. It came from conviction forged in his own journey of surrender. "Because Will, the enemy of your soul wants you to wait until you're alone, until the cameras are off, until the moment passes and you can talk yourself out of this. But God is meeting you here in your mess, in front of witnesses, because your public breakthrough can become someone else's private hope." He reached out both hands now, and Will grasped them like a drowning man grabbing a lifeline, their foreheads nearly touching as Jonathan began to speak words that would echo across social media within minutes and transform within hearts for years to come. "You don't have to clean yourself up first, Will. You don't have to perform righteousness or pretend you've got it all figured out. You just have to tell Jesus the truth about where you are and ask him to meet you there." Jonathan's voice had dropped to just above a whisper, but every microphone in the studio caught it with crystal clarity. "Tell him you're tired. Tell him you're broken. Tell him you need him, not as a concept or a distant deity, but as a present reality that can carry what you can't carry anymore." Will's shoulders began to shake again, but this time it wasn't from grief alone. It was from something breaking loose inside him that had been locked away for so long it had calcified into permanent tension. "Jesus," he began, and the name came out cracked and uncertain, like someone learning to speak after years of silence. "I don't even know how to do this, but Jonathan says I can just be real with you, so here it is." He took a shuddering breath that seemed to come from the depths of his being. "I'm tired of being Will Smith. I'm tired of the performance. I'm tired of pretending I have it all together when I'm falling apart inside. I can't forgive myself and I can't fix myself and I need help." The studio had gone so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning became audible, and even the hardened camera operators found themselves lowering their equipment slightly, feeling intrusive in a moment that transcended television and touched something eternal. Will's face had transformed from anguish to almost peaceful, tears still streaming but his expression softening as if a weight invisible to cameras but real to the soul had begun to lift from shoulders that had carried it for too long. Jonathan's grip on Will's hands tightened as he continued praying over him with a quiet intensity that made it clear this wasn't rehearsed religion but lived-out faith. "Father, meet Will right where he is. Not where he thinks he should be, not where others expect him to be, but exactly where he is right now in all his beautiful brokenness. Let him feel your presence in a way that's undeniable, in a way that changes everything." The words weren't flowery or performative, they were simple and direct, and something in the atmosphere of the studio shifted like a door had been opened to let fresh air into a room that had been sealed for too long. When Will finally opened his eyes, the change in his countenance was so dramatic that several audience members would later describe it as watching someone physically transform before their eyes. The tension that had been etched into his features for the entire interview had softened, replaced by an expression of almost childlike wonder mixed with profound relief. "I feel different," he said, his voice steadier now but filled with awe. "Like something heavy just lifted off me. Is that crazy?" He looked at Jonathan with eyes that were clearer somehow, less guarded, more present than they'd been since the interview started. "That's not crazy, that's grace," Jonathan replied with a smile that carried the joy of someone who'd witnessed this transformation before and never tired of seeing it happen. "What you're feeling is the Holy Spirit meeting you in your surrender. You just stopped performing and started being real with God, and that's when everything changes." He turned to face James and the audience, his expression both gentle and urgent. "What you all just witnessed isn't entertainment. This is what happens when someone stops trying to earn God's love and finally just receives it." James Corden had been sitting motionless through the entire exchange, his show completely forgotten as he watched something far more significant than viral content unfold before him. "Will, mate," he said, his British accent thick with emotion, "in all my years hosting, I've never seen anything like this. How do you feel right now, honestly?" The question was asked without any of his usual humor or theatrical timing, just genuine human curiosity about what his guest had just experienced. Will laughed, but it was different from his usual calculated charm. This was spontaneous and unrehearsed, the sound of genuine surprise and relief. "Honestly, James? I feel free. For the first time in I don't know how many years, I feel like I can just breathe without wondering who's watching or what they're thinking." He turned to Jonathan with gratitude radiating from every feature. "Thank you for not letting me hide. Thank you for loving me enough to tell me the truth even when it was uncomfortable." His hand moved unconsciously to his chest as if checking to confirm that the weight was really gone. "I spent my whole life trying to be everything to everyone, and it took falling apart on live television to realize I just needed to be honest with God." The production assistant who'd been timing the segment had long since stopped checking her watch, and the director in the control booth had made the decision to let the cameras keep rolling regardless of how far they'd run over schedule. Social media was already exploding with clips and reactions. The moment Will had started praying had been captured and was spreading across every platform with unprecedented velocity, and within minutes the hashtag #WillSmithSurrender was trending worldwide as millions of viewers found themselves unexpectedly moved by witnessing such raw authenticity from someone they'd only ever seen through the polished lens of celebrity. Jonathan leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression of someone who'd watched God do what only God can do, and he addressed the camera with the same gentle authority he'd brought to the entire conversation. "For everyone watching this right now, what you witnessed wasn't about Will Smith's fame or my role in a television series about Jesus. This was about the power of honesty meeting the presence of grace. Will had the courage to stop performing and start being real, and that's available to every single person watching, regardless of who you are or what you've done. His words carried the weight of invitation rather than judgment, offering hope instead of condemnation. Will nodded emphatically, wiping the last traces of tears from his face with a tissue James had handed him. If you're watching this and you're tired like I was tired, if you're carrying weight that's crushing you, if you've spent your whole life performing for everyone around you and you don't even know who you really are anymore, I want you to know something. He paused and looked directly into the camera with an intensity that made millions of viewers feel like he was speaking directly to them. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be honest. Tell God the truth about where you are, and He'll meet you there. I just did it in front of millions of people, and if I can do it, anyone can. Jonathan added one final thought, his voice soft but clear. The same grace that met Will Smith in his brokenness is waiting to meet you in yours. It doesn't matter if you're famous or unknown, successful or struggling, religious or skeptical. God's love isn't earned through performance, it's received through surrender. And the beautiful thing about surrender is that it's not about losing yourself, it's about finally finding yourself in the one who created you. He smiled with genuine warmth. Stop performing. Start being real. That's where freedom lives. James looked at both his guests with undisguised admiration and spoke with uncharacteristic seriousness. I think what happened here tonight will help more people than any episode we've ever done. This wasn't about entertainment, this was about truth, and truth has a way of setting people free. The audience erupted in applause that felt less like appreciation for a show and more like witness to something sacred. And as the cameras finally stopped rolling, Will Smith sat quietly with his eyes closed and a peace on his face that money couldn't buy and fame couldn't manufacture, the kind of peace that only comes from finally stopping the performance and surrendering to the one who loves us not for what we do but for who we are. If this story touched something deep in your heart, take a moment to comment below about your own journey from performance to authenticity, and subscribe for more testimonies that remind us all that we're not alone in our struggles and that grace is always available for those brave enough to stop pretending and start being real. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to not be okay, and that surrender isn't weakness but the beginning of true strength.